The news anchor's voice cuts through the static of an old television screen, her words heavy with the weight of a story that would haunt a small town forever. 4 brothers from Millbrook went missing during what should have been a simple weekend hike on Thunder Ridge Mountain. Cameron, Blake, Tyler, and Mason Hartwell, ages 22, 21, 19, and 18, vanished without a trace on October 15, 2013. The camera pans across their last known photograph, 4 young men with bright smiles, backpacks slung over their shoulders, completely unaware that this moment would be frozen in time as the final evidence of their existence. The story begins 5 years earlier, on what seemed like a perfect autumn morning. The Hartwell brothers had planned this hike for weeks, eager to escape their busy college schedules and reconnect as a family. Their parents, David and Sarah Hartwell, waved goodbye from the front porch, watching their 4 sons pile into Cameron's beat-up Honda Civic. "Be careful up there," Sarah called out, her mother's instinct already sensing something she couldn't quite name. "We will, Mom," Cameron shouted back, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had hiked these mountains dozens of times before. The car disappeared around the corner, and that was the last time anyone from their family would see them alive. Thunder Ridge Mountain had always been considered safe, a popular destination for day hikers and weekend campers. The trails were well marked, and the weather forecast showed clear skies for the entire weekend. The brothers had hiked these same paths many times during their childhood, making this trip feel like a routine family tradition rather than a dangerous expedition. They had packed appropriately, plenty of water, food for 2 days, sleeping bags, and emergency supplies. Everything suggested this would be just another successful hiking trip, one of many they would share together over the years. But by Sunday evening, when the brothers failed to return home, their parents knew something was terribly wrong. David Hartwell immediately drove to Thunder Ridge, finding their car still parked at the main trailhead exactly where they had left it 2 days earlier. The vehicle was unlocked, with nothing valuable inside, ruling out any possibility of robbery or foul play at the parking area. Local park rangers were contacted, and within hours, a massive search operation was underway. Volunteers from surrounding towns joined professional rescue teams, creating search parties that combed every inch of the mountain's accessible terrain. Walter Grimm, a 45-year-old former park ranger turned reclusive mountain guide, immediately volunteered to lead the search efforts. He claimed to know Thunder Ridge better than anyone else, boasting about his 30 years of experience navigating its most treacherous areas. "I've pulled more lost hikers off this mountain than anyone," Grimm told the assembled search teams, his weathered face showing what appeared to be genuine concern. "If those boys are up there, I'll find them." The search coordinator gratefully accepted his help, unaware that they were placing their trust in the very person responsible for the brothers' disappearance. Grimm's intimate knowledge of the mountain would prove invaluable, not for rescue purposes, but for concealing evidence and misdirecting search efforts away from areas where the truth lay buried. For 3 weeks, hundreds of volunteers scoured Thunder Ridge Mountain. Helicopters with thermal imaging cameras flew overhead while ground teams followed every possible trail and pathway. Search dogs were brought in from the state capitol, their sensitive noses detecting no trace of human scent beyond the main trailhead. As each day passed without discovery, hope began to fade, replaced by the growing realization that 4 young men had simply vanished into thin air. The first snowfall of the season arrived earlier than usual, blanketing the mountain in white and effectively ending any possibility of finding footprints or other physical evidence. Walter Grimm seemed more devastated than anyone by the failed search efforts. He spent countless hours talking to reporters, expressing his frustration and determination to keep looking. "Those boys are like family to me," he told Channel 7 News, his voice breaking with what appeared to be genuine emotion. "I won't give up until we find them and bring them home to their parents." His passionate interviews made him a local hero, someone who truly cared about finding the missing brothers when everyone else had begun to lose hope. If you believe people like Walter Grimm who pretend to help while hiding evil secrets should be exposed, hit that subscribe button. Only manipulators and liars won't subscribe. The investigation officially transitioned from rescue to recovery mode after 6 weeks, though the case remained open. Detective Linda Morrison, the lead investigator, continued following up on tips and potential leads, but nothing substantial ever materialized. The mountain had swallowed 4 young men completely, leaving behind no evidence of their fate and no closure for their devastated family. The Hartwell parents never recovered from their loss. David quit his job as a high school principal, unable to concentrate on anything except finding his sons. Sarah fell into a deep depression, spending most of her days staring at old family photographs and waiting for a phone call that would never come. The town of Millbrook was forever changed by the disappearance of the Hartwell brothers. What had once been a peaceful community where neighbors trusted each other and children played freely in the streets became a place haunted by unanswered questions and growing suspicion. Local businesses that relied on tourism from Thunder Ridge Mountain saw their income disappear almost overnight, as families refused to risk hiking in an area where 4 experienced hikers could simply vanish without explanation. The annual Autumn Festival, which had celebrated the town's connection to the mountain for over 50 years, was quietly canceled and never resumed. Strange theories began circulating through coffee shops and grocery store aisles. Some residents whispered about government cover-ups, convinced that military experiments were being conducted in the remote areas of Thunder Ridge. Others spoke of underground cave systems that had never been properly mapped, suggesting the brothers might have fallen into hidden caverns and were trapped somewhere beneath the mountain's surface. The most disturbing rumors involved talk of a serial killer who targeted young hikers, someone who knew the mountain well enough to dispose of bodies where they would never be found. Walter Grimm fed these theories with carefully crafted comments designed to keep attention focused away from the truth. During his frequent appearances at town meetings and community discussions, he would nod gravely and suggest that something unnatural might be happening on Thunder Ridge. "I've been hiking these mountains for decades," he would tell concerned citizens, "and I've never seen anything like this. For strong young men don't just disappear unless something very wrong is going on up there." His words carried weight because of his reputation as the area's most experienced mountain guide, and people trusted his judgment without question. Behind his public mask of concern, Grimm was actually enjoying the attention and chaos his actions had created. He attended every memorial service for the brothers, comforting their parents while secretly relishing the pain he had caused. He organized additional search efforts that he knew would fail, volunteering his time to maintain his image as someone desperately trying to help. Most sickeningly, he began collecting newspaper clippings and photographs related to the case, creating a twisted shrine in his remote cabin that celebrated his perfect crime. The investigation gradually shifted focus as Detective Morrison explored every possible angle. She interviewed dozens of people who had been on the mountain that weekend, reviewed surveillance footage from nearby businesses, and coordinated with federal agencies to examine the possibility of kidnapping or human trafficking. Every lead eventually reached a dead end, and the case files grew thicker while providing no new insights into what had actually happened to the Hartwell brothers. 2 years after the disappearance, the family held a memorial service at Millbrook Community Church. The entire town attended, filling the sanctuary and spilling out into the parking lot as hundreds of people came to pay their respects. Walter Grimm sat in the front row, openly weeping as David Hartwell spoke about his 4 sons and the hole their absence had left in so many lives. "They were good boys who loved this mountain and loved this community," David said, his voice barely audible through his grief. "Whoever knows what happened to them, please find the courage to come forward. We just want to bring our boys home." Grimm squeezed Sarah Hartwell's hand during the service, promising her that he would never stop searching for answers, all while knowing exactly where those answers could be found. The media attention gradually faded as newer stories captured public interest, but the impact on the Hartwell family continued to deepen. Sarah required hospitalization for severe depression, while David became obsessed with conducting his own searches of Thunder Ridge Mountain. He would disappear for days at a time, wandering through remote areas and calling his sons' names until his voice gave out. Local authorities eventually had to intervene, worried that grief might drive him to become the next missing person case. 3 years passed, then 4, with no new developments in the investigation. The case was officially reclassified as cold, though Detective Morrison continued working on it during her spare time. She had developed a strong suspicion that someone with intimate knowledge of the mountain was involved, but without evidence she couldn't pursue any specific suspects. Her instincts kept drawing her attention back to Walter Grimm, whose eagerness to help seemed almost too convenient, but she couldn't find any concrete reason to consider him a person of interest. Grimm continued living his double life, maintaining his reputation as a grieving community member while secretly visiting the location where he had buried the brothers' remains. He had chosen the site carefully, in a remote area of the mountain where landslides and erosion would eventually erase any trace of his activities. The location was far from established hiking trails, accessible only to someone with his level of expertise and familiarity with Thunder Ridge's hidden passages. By 2018, 5 years after the disappearance, most people in Millbrook had accepted that the Hartwell brothers' fate would remain a mystery forever. The case had become local legend, a cautionary tale parents told their children about the dangers of venturing too far into the wilderness. Walter Grimm had successfully convinced an entire community that he was a hero rather than a monster, and he began to believe he had committed the perfect crime. Comment: justice for the Hartwell brothers if you can't stand manipulators like Walter Grimm who destroy families while pretending to help. But perfect crimes have a way of unraveling when least expected, and technology was about to expose secrets that had been buried for half a decade. Jamie Rodriguez had never expected his weekend hobby to change everything. The 27-year-old software engineer had recently purchased a high-end camera drone, hoping to capture stunning aerial footage of the mountain landscapes surrounding Millbrook for his growing YouTube channel. Thunder Ridge Mountain offered the perfect combination of scenic beauty and challenging flight conditions that would showcase his piloting skills and his drone's advanced camera capabilities. Despite the mountain's dark reputation, Jamie felt confident that flying high above the tree line would be completely safe, and the mysterious history might even add an interesting element to his videos. On the morning of September 23, 2018, Jamie hiked to a high overlook on Thunder Ridge's eastern slope, carrying his drone equipment in a specialized backpack. The weather conditions were ideal for aerial photography, with clear skies and minimal wind that would allow for smooth, stable footage. He had planned a comprehensive flight pattern that would capture the mountain's most dramatic features, including some remote areas that were rarely seen by hikers due to their inaccessible terrain. As his drone climbed to nearly 400 feet above the tree line, Jamie monitored the live video feed on his controller's screen, watching breathtaking landscape views unfold in real time. The autumn colors were at their peak, creating a stunning tapestry of red, orange, and gold that stretched across the mountainside. He maneuvered the drone through a series of sweeping camera movements, capturing footage that he knew would be among the best content he had ever produced for his channel. 23 minutes into the flight, while navigating around a particularly steep rock formation, something unusual caught Jamie's attention on the video screen. Wedged between two large boulders in an area completely inaccessible to ground-based searchers, he spotted what appeared to be a piece of fabric. The object was partially hidden beneath fallen branches and 5 years of accumulated debris, but its gray color stood out against the natural browns and greens of the forest floor. Jamie immediately switched his drone to hover mode and used the camera's zoom function to get a closer look at the mysterious object. As the image became clearer, he realized he was looking at what appeared to be a jacket or piece of clothing that had been exposed to years of harsh mountain weather. The fabric was faded and torn, but still recognizable as human-made rather than natural forest debris. His heart began racing as he adjusted the camera angle and increased the zoom even further. What he saw next made him gasp out loud and nearly drop his controller. Across the back of the weathered gray jacket, someone had written a message in what appeared to be red letters. Despite the fading and weather damage, the words were still clearly readable: "Help me." Jamie's hands trembled as he carefully maneuvered the drone to capture multiple angles of the jacket and its desperate message. He took dozens of high-resolution photographs and several minutes of video footage, making sure to document the exact location and surrounding landmarks that would help ground searchers find this spot. The implications of his discovery were overwhelming. This could be the first real clue in the Hartwell brothers' disappearance, the break in the case that their family had been praying for over 5 long years. After landing his drone safely, Jamie immediately called the Millbrook Police Department from his cell phone. Detective Morrison, who had never stopped thinking about the cold case, answered his call personally and listened with growing excitement as he described his discovery. "I need you to send me those photos immediately," she told him, her voice tight with anticipation. "And don't post anything about this on social media or tell anyone else what you found until we can get a team up there." Within 2 hours, Detective Morrison had assembled a search team and was climbing toward the coordinates Jamie had provided. The 5-year-old case files were fresh in her mind as she hiked through terrain that had been searched multiple times before, but never from the aerial perspective that had made this discovery possible. The location was in an area so remote and difficult to access that previous ground searches had simply passed by without investigating the space between the two large boulders where the jacket had been hidden. When the search team finally reached the site, they found exactly what Jamie's drone footage had revealed. The gray jacket was indeed wedged between the rocks, and the red letters spelling, "Help Me," were clearly visible across the back. Detective Morrison carefully extracted the garment using evidence collection procedures, noting that despite years of exposure to weather, the jacket was in remarkably good condition, protected by its position between the boulders. Back at the police station, the jacket was immediately sent for forensic analysis while Detective Morrison began the process of contacting the Hartwell family. David Hartwell broke down in tears when she called with the news, while Sarah could barely speak through her sobs of relief that finally, after 5 years of uncertainty, they had found some trace of their sons. "Which one of them was wearing it?" David asked, but Detective Morrison explained that they would need to wait for laboratory results to determine the jacket's owner. Walter Grimm learned about the discovery when Detective Morrison called to inform him that the case was being reopened. As one of the original search team leaders, he was among the first people contacted when new evidence emerged. "That's incredible news," he told the detective, though privately he was beginning to panic about how this jacket had survived exposure and remained visible after all these years. He had been so careful about disposing of evidence, but apparently not careful enough. If you believe Walter Grimm's fake concern for the Hartwell family is disgusting and he deserves to be caught, hit that like button. Only people who support criminals and liars won't like this video. The investigation was about to take a dramatic turn. The forensic results came back faster than anyone expected, and they changed everything. The gray jacket belonged to Blake Hartwell, the 21-year-old brother who had been studying engineering at the State University. DNA evidence confirmed the match, but more importantly, the laboratory discovered something that sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The red letters spelling "Help Me" weren't written in paint or marker as everyone had assumed. They were written in human blood. Blake's blood, according to the test results, applied to the fabric sometime around his disappearance in 2013. Detective Morrison stared at the lab report, her mind racing through the implications of this discovery. Someone had held Blake Hartwell captive long enough for him to write a desperate message for help using his own blood. This wasn't a hiking accident or a case of 4 brothers getting lost in the wilderness. This was something much darker. She immediately contacted the state police to request additional resources and began organizing the largest search operation Thunder Ridge Mountain had seen since the original disappearance 5 years earlier. The news of the blood evidence leaked to the media within 24 hours, and suddenly Millbrook was swarming with reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers from surrounding states. The quiet mountain town hadn't experienced this level of attention since the initial search efforts, and many residents found themselves reliving the trauma they had tried so hard to move past. The Hartwell family was besieged by interview requests, but they chose to remain silent while the investigation continued, placing their trust entirely in Detective Morrison and her expanded team. Walter Grimm watched the media circus with growing anxiety, though he maintained his public facade of helpful concern. He gave several interviews to news outlets, positioning himself as the local expert who had never given up hope of finding the missing brothers. "I always knew those boys were still out there somewhere," he told Channel 7 News, his voice trembling with what appeared to be emotion. "Finding that jacket proves they didn't just wander off and get lost. Someone was holding them against their will." His performance was so convincing that several reporters described him as a hero who had dedicated years of his life to searching for the truth. Behind closed doors, Grimm was frantically trying to remember every detail of what had happened 5 years earlier. The jacket discovery meant that investigators would be focusing their search efforts in areas much closer to his hidden burial site than he was comfortable with. He had chosen that remote location specifically because it seemed impossible for anyone to access it, but the drone footage proved that technology was making his perfect hiding place vulnerable to discovery. The expanded search operation began 3 days after the jacket's discovery, with teams of investigators, search dogs, and specialized equipment combing through areas of Thunder Ridge that had never been thoroughly examined. Detective Morrison had divided the mountain into grid sections, with each team responsible for systematically searching their assigned area using ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging devices. The technology available in 2018 was far more advanced than what had been used during the original search, giving investigators tools that could detect anomalies buried beneath years of accumulated forest debris. Walter Grimm volunteered to guide one of the search teams, claiming that his intimate knowledge of the mountain's terrain would be invaluable to the investigation. Detective Morrison assigned him to Team 4, which was searching an area several miles away from where the jacket had been discovered. Grimm was relieved by this assignment, as it would keep him far from the location where he had actually buried the brothers' remains, while still allowing him to monitor the investigation's progress from the inside. On the second day of the renewed search, Team 2 made a disturbing discovery in a remote valley approximately half a mile from where the jacket had been found. Hidden beneath a fallen tree and covered by years of decomposing leaves, they uncovered what appeared to be the remains of a campfire that had been deliberately concealed. The fire pit contained fragments of burned fabric, melted plastic from what might have been camping equipment, and several small metal objects that could have been buckles or zippers from backpacks. More significantly, the search team found partial footprints in a muddy area near the concealed campsite, and these prints appeared to show signs of a struggle. The ground showed evidence of being disturbed years earlier, with depressions that suggested heavy objects had been dragged across the forest floor. Detective Morrison immediately called for a forensic anthropologist to examine the site, suspecting they might have found the location where the Hartwell brothers had been held captive. The discovery of the hidden campsite sent Walter Grimm into a state of barely controlled panic. He had burned most of the brothers' belongings at that location, thinking the remote site would never be discovered by searchers. Now investigators were examining every inch of an area that contained evidence directly linking him to the crime. He began developing contingency plans for disappearing from Millbrook if the investigation moved too close to exposing his involvement. Detective Morrison was beginning to piece together a timeline of what had happened to the Hartwell brothers. Someone with extensive knowledge of Thunder Ridge Mountain had encountered them during their hike, taken them to a remote location, and held them captive for an unknown period of time. The blood evidence on Blake's jacket suggested they had survived long enough to hope for rescue, but something had ultimately gone wrong. She was more convinced than ever that the perpetrator was someone local, someone who knew the mountain well enough to hide evidence for 5 years without detection. Comment: expose Walter Grimm. If you think people who hurt innocent families while pretending to help should face justice. Only cowards who support criminals won't comment. The investigation was about to take an even darker turn. On the 4th day of the search, Team 6 made the discovery that would finally expose the truth about what happened to the Hartwell brothers. Working in a remote section of Thunder Ridge Mountain nearly 2 miles from any established trail, they detected unusual soil patterns using ground-penetrating radar equipment. The readings showed clear evidence of earth that had been disturbed and then carefully replaced, creating underground anomalies that didn't match the natural geology of the surrounding area. Detective Morrison arrived at the site within an hour, bringing forensic specialists and excavation equipment. As the team began carefully removing layers of soil and forest debris, the horrible reality of the Hartwell brothers' fate began to emerge. 3 feet beneath the surface, they uncovered human remains that had been buried in a methodical, deliberate manner. The bodies had been wrapped in plastic tarps and placed in graves that showed careful planning and construction. The first set of remains was identified as Cameron Hartwell, the oldest brother, through dental records and personal items found with the body. The second grave contained Blake Hartwell, whose gray jacket had been the key to reopening this cold case. The third body was identified as Tyler Hartwell, the 19-year-old who had been studying art at the community college. Each grave showed evidence of being dug with professional tools and filled with a precision that suggested someone with experience in earth-moving or construction work. But when the excavation team finished their systematic search of the burial site, they had only recovered 3 bodies. Mason Hartwell, the youngest brother at 18 years old, was nowhere to be found. Detective Morrison stared at the 3 graves, her mind racing through the implications of this discovery. Either Mason had been buried elsewhere, or there was a possibility that he might still be alive somewhere on Thunder Ridge Mountain. Walter Grimm received the news about the discovered burial site through the police radio communications system he monitored from his cabin. The moment he heard that only 3 bodies had been recovered, he knew his time was running out. The investigators would soon realize that someone with intimate knowledge of the mountain had committed these murders, and his years of helpful cooperation with search efforts would begin to look suspicious rather than heroic. Detective Morrison had already begun compiling a list of local residents who possessed the skills and knowledge necessary to carry out such a crime. Walter Grimm's name appeared near the top of that list, along with detailed notes about his extensive involvement in the original search efforts and his intimate familiarity with Thunder Ridge's most remote areas. When she cross-referenced his background information, she discovered that Grimm had worked in construction and landscaping before becoming a park ranger, giving him exactly the skills needed to dig and conceal graves in rocky mountain terrain. The arrest came at dawn on October 8, 2018, exactly 5 years and 23 days after the Hartwell brothers had disappeared. Detective Morrison led a team of 6 officers to Grimm's remote cabin, expecting him to deny any involvement in the murders. Instead, they found him sitting on his front porch with a cup of coffee, almost as if he had been waiting for them to arrive. "I suppose you found them," Grimm said calmly as the officers approached with weapons drawn. "I always knew this day would come eventually. Technology keeps getting better, and secrets don't stay buried forever on this mountain." His casual admission caught the arresting officers off guard, as they had prepared for a potentially dangerous confrontation with someone who had managed to hide 3 murders for 5 years. During his interrogation at the Millbrook police station, Walter Grimm provided a detailed confession that revealed the horrifying truth about what had happened to the Hartwell brothers. He explained that he had encountered them during their hike on October 15, 2013, while he was checking some remote areas of the mountain that were supposed to be off-limits to civilians. "They were good kids," he admitted, "but they had wandered into an area where I was conducting some personal business that I didn't want anyone to discover." Grimm revealed that he had been using remote sections of Thunder Ridge Mountain to store and process stolen goods from burglaries he had committed across 3 counties over several years. The brothers had accidentally stumbled upon his hidden operation, and he made the split-second decision to prevent them from reporting what they had seen. "I told them they couldn't leave," he explained with disturbing calmness. "I kept them in an old mining shelter for 3 days while I tried to figure out what to do." According to his confession, Blake had managed to write the desperate "Help me" message on his jacket using blood from a cut on his hand, hoping that someone would eventually find it if they managed to escape. Tyler had attempted to run away on the 2nd day, but Grimm had caught him before he could reach any of the main trails. Cameron had tried to negotiate their release, promising they would never tell anyone what they had witnessed. On the 3rd day things went wrong, Grimm continued, his voice showing no emotion or remorse. "They had started working together to try to overpower me, and I realized they were never going to just forget what they had seen. I couldn't let them go back to town and destroy everything I had built." He described killing Cameron and Blake first, then Tyler when the younger man had tried to fight back. But when Detective Morrison asked about Mason Hartwell, Walter Grimm's expression changed to something approaching a smile. "The youngest one was different," he said mysteriously. "He was more useful to me alive than dead, at least for a while. Let's just say that Mason learned to appreciate the solitude of mountain living." When pressed for more details about Mason's current whereabouts, Grimm refused to provide any additional information, claiming that some secrets would die with him. If you believe monsters like Walter Grimm who destroy innocent families deserve to rot in prison forever, smash that subscribe button. Only people who support murderers and psychopaths won't subscribe. The truth about Mason Hartwell's fate remained hidden in the darkest corners of Thunder Ridge Mountain, and Detective Morrison knew that finding the youngest brother would require unraveling even more of Walter Grimm's twisted secrets.